Friedrich Nietzsche, chapter 3. Nietzsche calls this change in your thinking the greatest quote-unquote event of our time. The new knowledge that faith in God has become impossible and is no longer worthy of acceptance is equivalent to the setting of the sun. Now the world appears to those realizing this quote-unquote event somehow older, strange, and suspicious. We are living in a late hour of mankind. The post-Christian era has begun. Nobody knows what the result of this quote-unquote event will be. Everything will collapse that was built upon this past faith in God, as, for example, our entire European morality. An appalling sequence of terrors will logically ensue. Only the few select ones, those who actually should belong to the coming century, but were prematurely born, the riddle solvers, who are living on mountaintops to get a glimpse of the future knowledge, these will sense the light, happiness, encouragement, and the sunrise of the new day. Their hearts will overflow with gratitude, astonishment, and expectancy. Their ships may sail again towards unknown shores. The daring search for new knowledge is once more permitted. The seas lie open before them. Perhaps there was never before such an quote-unquote open ocean. God has died. This terrifying proclamation rallies all energies in Nietzsche to a final attack upon the sacred belief of Christianity. He respects or even admires Jesus, but denies that he has any meaning for our age. Quote, when we hear on a Sunday morning our old bells ringing, we ask ourselves, is this possible? This is still being done for a Jew crucified 2,000 years ago? Who told us he was the Son of God? Meaning he told us. Close quote. Our religion is a piece of antiquity transposed into modern times. We are made to believe, quote, in a God who has a child with a mortal woman, actually a little girl. Originally they believed her to be 10. A sage who demands that we discontinue to work or maintain courts of justice, and who tells us that the most important task is to watch the signs of the coming end of the world. He requests of his disciples to drink his blood. Is it possible that such things are still being believed? In the vein of Kierkegaard's thinking, with which he was unacquainted, Nietzsche, the Antichrist, is indignant about the unholy fusion of state and religion, as he also believes that the state prevents the single one from attaining his dignity. Original Christianity taught man not to conform to the state and even to separate himself from his family for the sake of the spirit. Our statesmen, quote-unquote anti-Christians in their deeds, have clearly changed this. They attend communion. They promote quote-unquote Christian thinking in their speeches and schools. The chasm between the world and the faith of Jesus has been eliminated. Now the Christian is a soldier, a judge, a patriot who knows nothing but non-resistance to evil. He defends his honor instead of accepting humiliations. He is as proud as though he had never heard of the humble Galilean teachings, and the church has become precisely the institution Jesus wanted to abolish. Nietzsche's brilliant and poetic style serves to give his denial of Jesus' mission an effective literary background. Quote, only a Jewish setting could have produced Jesus. I mean, a landscape overhung by the dark, majestic thunderclouds of Jehovah. Only here could one sense as a miracle of quote-unquote love the rare and sudden breaking of a single sun ray through the all-pervasive twilight, a ray of unmerited quote-unquote grace. Only here could Christ dream in his rainbows, his ladder towards heaven upon which God descended to man. Anywhere else, the sun and bright weather were too much part of everyday normal rule. Close quote. No modern man can no longer accept Jesus' teachings. He will stoically face his fate and wrestle with adversities. He needs no longer the priests who have done nothing but to anesthetize human evil, instead of strengthening man to face it. The result is that the ordinary Christian is a miserable figure who does not really deserve the harsh punishment with which Christianity threatens him in afterlife. Christianity has created sin, this sickness of the soul, but the belief in Christianity's remedies is rapidly waning. The churches are nothing but graves and gravestones of God, and, quote, the Christian resolve to consider the world ugly and bad has made the world just that, close quote. Nietzsche's hatred of Christian morality extends to the Jewish race. It's not a frickin' race. He says, quote, sin is a Jewish sentiment and a Jewish invention, close quote. Such damning verdicts are, however, contradictions by the occasional fair appraisal of the Jewish people. He realizes their accumulated capital in intellect and willpower, the result of generations of suffering and persecution. He has made them hated everywhere. Yet he also praises them for having produced in Jesus the quote unquote noblest man, in Spinoza the purest sage, and in the Bible the most effective moral code in the world. Then he turns his renewed force against Christianity. He calls it the religion of compassion, a depressing sentiment that saps our vitality. Compassion annihilates the high tone of life. It leads to weakness. I think pity would be more accurate, to be honest with you. And is the practice of nihilism. The Christian God is a God of the sick, one who opposes all the natural and impetuous urges of great living. No wonder that a true Christian is a, quote, psychological degenerate, close quote. There is only one aristocratic figure in the New Testament, Pontius Pilate. His disdainful question, quote unquote, what is truth? Parentheses, meaning, of course, that truth does not count in the world of realities, close parentheses, is the only word of lasting value in the New Testament. Parentheses, it is only logical that Nietzsche's disciple, Oswald Spengler, speaks of this same question as, quote, the only New Testament word that has any racial quality, close quote, close parentheses. The strong races of North Europe have been deprived of their vigor by this Christian God. They have become sick and old and capable of a new religious concept. Almost 2,000 years have gone by and not a single new God has come to us. Christianity has soiled and spoiled everything, created a false equality, and paralyzed our vital energies with the anemic ideal of hypocritical saintliness. The laws of life are high above Christian idealism. Nietzsche accuses the church of having perverted man's attitude towards sex, his most Olympian and powerful instinct. Eternal damnation has always been so closely associated with sexual matters that the very term sin has become a synonym for sex. Whole generations of Christians have been reproducing themselves with a guilty conscience. That is, incidentally, the reason the love story is the most popular medium for man's imaginative escapist tendencies. The waste of spiritual energies in Christianity is appalling, and our churches have employed the fear techniques of a decaying civilization in order to stir up man's nervous energies. They make him feel sinful. Nietzsche's criticism of missionary work is equally severe. In reality, the Christian church is, so he suggests, nothing but a collection of primitive and predatory cults and beliefs. Quote, not the essentially Christian, but the universally pagan of its ceremonies, quote, parentheses, close parentheses, the Last Supper, is the reason for its expansion, close quote. Wherever the missionary has gone, the church has adapted itself to existing superstitions and practices. While this teaching may appear a skillful method to win over pagans, it illustrates clearly the coarseness and baseness of its intellectual status. Primitive tribes accept the two European narcotics, whiskey and Christianity, most willingly. They have also declined the most quickly from these two. Or they have also declined most quickly from these two. Such a basically unheroic and insincere church was and is, of course, too far gone to be improved or reformed. The Reformation was nothing but the paralyzing of half Christianity's body. It was treason of the meanest kind to revive a church that showed all the marks of decay. When Luther came with his perverting theology of justification by faith, Europe had already begun to rise again from the coma which the Christian poison had induced. The Renaissance promised an almost miraculous revival of the arts and sciences in their natural vitality, and in Rome, the very seat of the dying church, the new life rose as a strong youth rises beside his aging ancestor. There could have been hardly any doubt about the outcome of this development if Luther had not come. A Caesar Borgia would have been the man to finish off a corrupt and dying Christianity, but Luther came, this misfit priest full of vindictive instincts and intent on leading a peasant revolt against the Renaissance. To his, I love the uneducated, to his own consternation, he saw that the corrupt papacy was no longer in power, but that the great quote-unquote yes to life was being spoken by the revived antiquity of the Renaissance. The clumsy Germans destroyed the Renaissance as they have always destroyed every other great freedom. Quote, they are my enemies, close quote, and their filthy hands left nothing untouched. Their conscience is burned with the creation of Protestantism, the most incurable sickness of Europe. The poet Stephen George, his disciple and the leader of the George Kreis, expressed the same thought in his cycle, The Seventh Ring, when he praises the Renaissance as an awakening with clouds of flowers drifting into the country, which the ugly frost and coral of dogmatism chased away. Luther's robust mind, so Nietzsche says in The Gay Science, had no understanding of the Mediterranean sense of freedom, of the spirit of the Mediterranean sense of mistrust for the suspicion of nature, man, and the spirit. He did not understand the victory of the church, but saw only its corruption, not realizing the aristocratic skepticism and tolerance which any victorious power will permit. He delivered the sacred book into everybody's hands, including the scholars, who have always been destroyers of faith. Kierkegaard, the Protestant, raised the same accusations against Luther when he said he threw the Bible at the believers' heads. Luther allowed the priests freedom of sex without realizing that the faith of 3/4 of the people, especially that of the women, rested upon the exceptional position that priests held in not being subject to the physical laws of life. Nor did he realize that the faith in miracles had its roots in the same admiration for the priestly celibacy which he abolished. Once he had taken this step, he had logically also to abolish confession, that, quote, discreet cistern of and tomb of all secrets, close quote, which the priest was meant to represent. Luther thus abolished a higher type of man because he hated him. He ought not to be held responsible, however, for the appalling superfluities which Protestantism developed later on, for he did not realize what forces he set in motion. But he marks the victory of mediocrity, Philistinism, and a mob psychology that is the end of all true spiritual grandeur. About 1870, in the midst of ascending political power and increasing prosperity, Nietzsche had sensed the first signs of Europe's intellectual and spiritual sterility. Quote, we shall either die because of our religion or religion will die because of us, close quote. He wrote, about 10 years later, he diagnosed his age as one lacking authority, fear, and trust. Everything was being dissolved in idle palaver. Germany's victory over France and the newly created empire had produced a shallow self-confidence and a brazen sense of superiority that were ultimately to lead to new catastrophes. The Bismarck era saw an unexcelled boom the mushrooming of new business enterprises, and the subsequent orgy of public and private building of inferior taste. Nietzsche realized that the traditional confidence in religion was quickly giving way to an unlimited faith in scientific progress, to which Germany was one of the leading contributors. The soul of the nation aspired only to security, prosperity, and a kind of quote-unquote eternal bliss inferior to the promises of religion. This was emphatically the end of the much vaunted idealism of Kant and Schiller, and even of the altruistic patriotism of poets like Arndt and Körner. Only the most concrete and crude goals remained. Man was unashamedly revealing himself as the beast he was. He was rebelling against all higher values, and this rebellion killed God, because he, quote, he has witnessed the depths and abysses of man, all his hidden meanness and ugliness. Man cannot bear to have a witness, close quote. God was a danger to man's self-appointed rule and therefore had to die. Now that he is dead, man is confronted by an ocean of uncertainty, an infinity of nothingness, a situation of apocalyptic character. Apocalyptic character. These keen diagnostic extremes are accompanied by only a distant regret. While Nietzsche deplores the absence of reverence, trust, fear, and idealism, he makes the general decay an occasion for personal rebellion and the uprising of divine rank. Quote, if there were any gods, how could I bear not to be one? Therefore, there are no gods. Close quote.